Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for the Robert E. Howard Show. It's the Robert E. Howard Show once again, and today Roger and I are going to be talking about Skullface. It's Skullface. A rather significant novel written by Robert E. Howard and published originally in 1929. Was it 29 or 28? It was 1929. I wrote it down. Originally, it was published starting in October 1929 in Weird Tales. It was a 3-part serial. And it's extremely pulpy. I mean, the sheer number of pulp tropes that Robert E. Howard manages to squeeze into this novella is really impressive. But you know, he was a talented guy. You could find this story nowadays in this book. This is Tales of Weird Menace, which is published by the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press. It's a fantastic book full of pulpy stuff. And Skullface, it features Skullface, is the main story in this volume. It's the opening story. And by far, it is the most well-known story that you'll find in here. Skullface is interesting. It's very pulpy, but a lot of people have really liked it. August Derleth, of course, when he put together a Robert E. Howard anthology called the anthology Skullface and Others. So he thought a lot of this story. And there are some good points to it, for sure. But approaching this story and talking about this story can be a little challenging because it is, as the kids would say nowadays, problematic. It is a story that is extremely racist. And I say that because the whole plot basically depends on racism. And I'll get into that in a second. It is Robert E. Howard's version of a Fu Manchu story, basically. Robert E. Howard was a fan of Sax Rohmer's Fu Manchu stories. And Fu Manchu those stories were Yellow Peril stories. And Yellow Peril stories were how would you put it? They were like a subgenre of adventure, basically. But those stories were, racist and xenophobic. Basically, they played upon the anxieties of people who were afraid that, China could take over the earth, And those stories kind of depended on that kind of xenophobic attitudes. And so you don't hear too much about Fu Manchu anymore, but Skullface was basically Robert E. Howard's version of a Fu Manchu novel, only he dialed everything up to 11 in this one, including the villain, Cthulhu's. It's Cthulhu's, which sounds pretty familiar. And this story has been sort of placed into the Cthulhu mythos afterwards. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but this story does show a lot of influence from H.P. Lovecraft, which is pretty obvious when you read the story. More than just the name Cthulhu's. Cthulhu's is a dastardly villain, of course. He is an evil mastermind, and a great one. The best thing in this story is this character, Cthulhu's, also known as the Master, also known as the Scorpion, also known as Skullface. He's, depending on who you ask, this dastardly villain, is called a lot of things. But this dastardly villain has an evil plan, which unfortunately for him is foiled in this novel. Our main character is Stephen Costigan. No, not that Stephen Costigan, not the boxer. Robert E. Howard really liked that name. Now, Costigan, in this story, is an American who is suffering from PTSD. He was in the First World War. And he becomes, unfortunately, an opium addict. And he's lounging around in an opium den, which is run by, wouldn't you know it, Skullface. or the Scorpion, or the Master, or Cthulhu's. Anyway, he is taken by Skullface, and Skullface basically says, you're an opium addict, you're a mess, but, you work for me, and I can cure you of your addiction. And Costigan goes along with it. He doesn't know just quite how dastardly this guy is. But the way Cthulhu cures him is he gets him addicted to another drug, which is even worse. But it does give him super strength. And one of the things that Skullface ends up wanting him to do is murder somebody. And then at this, Costigan rebels, because Costigan is a decent guy at heart. Eventually, Costigan joins up with a British agent, John Gordon. John Gordon, another name that Robert E. Howard liked a lot. And John Gordon and Costigan team up to bring down Skullface. Now, Skullface, his whole evil plan for world domination is basically he wants to bring down all of the governments of the world. And the way he's going to do it is he is going to get all of the non-white people, everybody in the world who's not white, he's going to bring them all together to create this vast army to destroy all the white people's governments. So right there, there you have it. Right there. So he's going to bring together all of these different cultures with different religions and different governments, and he's going to get them all working together using his evil influence to destroy the white people who are on top. And once all the white governments are destroyed, he has an even more nefarious plan. There's spoilers here going forward here. Cthulhu, as it turns out, he identifies himself as Cthulhu of Egypt. He's from Egypt. And he is fulfilling a legend of a mysterious man from Egypt who will come from the sea and bring together a bunch of people to conquer the earth. But he's not really from Egypt. He's really from Atlantis. He's Cthulhu's from Atlantis, ancient Atlantis. And what happened was, when Atlantis sank, Cthulhu was an evil sorcerer, and him and a bunch of other sorcerers and kings from Atlantis, they used spells, they used magic to make themselves immortal. And they're basically the living dead. So he's basically a zombie. He's a mummy. I should put it that way. I'm sorry, Roger. I didn't want to use the wrong terminology. He's a mummy. And he was put into his coffin, and all these other sorcerers and kings are put into their coffins, and Atlantis sank. And Cthulhu's, his coffin somehow was jarred or something by ocean currents and rose to the surface and was found by a ship and brought on board. And then he was set free to cause destruction. And so he has magic, he has hypnotism, and he uses drugs to help influence people. And this is all part of his master plan. The whole thing is fairly ridiculous. But it is very much in a popular pulp tradition at the time. This was written 100 years ago when, unfortunately, racism was pretty prevalent. And so this is the kind of thing that was it was just accepted, this kind of story. And so all of the ridiculousness of the plot, it doesn't really matter, or it didn't really matter to most people reading the story. Although I assume it would probably bother some of the non-white readers of weird tales, but they must have had thick skins because, man, there was a lot of that kind of thing in pulp writing at the time. It was very common. Uh, and so you have that as the basic plot. There are a lot of good points to the story, though. The action is fantastic. And like I said, the villain is great. It's full of, like I said, a ton of pulp tropes in here. You know, you've got somebody about to be killed on an altar. You've got all kinds of stuff. You know, kidnappings, daring escapes, magnificent battles. There's a lot of stuff going on in this story. And it also has a pretty good atmosphere. It's interesting that Costigan is a drug addict and that he's trying to escape his addiction, basically. He also knows, since he finds out about the drug that Cthulhu gave him, that is even worse than the drug he was on, even worse than opium. So he knows he's going to die at the end. So this is all a heroic sacrifice on his part. And he falls in love with a young woman who's really only there as as a plot device. It's definitely well worth reading if you're interested in Robert E. Howard's work and if you're interested in pulp fiction at the time. This is a really interesting look at popular fiction at the time and some of the attitudes that people just had. I mean, I don't judge Robert E. Howard too harshly for this story and some of the attitudes presented in this story because, like I said, he lived 100 years ago. He grew up in Texas 100 years ago. This kind of story was very popular. It was just normal, as unsettling as that is to think about. And if we, all of us, had grown up 100 years ago, our attitudes probably wouldn't be any different, really. We're not superior people. You know, we've just progressed socially, thankfully. So this is a kind of artifact of the time, Skullface. As a story, as a pulp story, it really works. But you do have, you know, the racism of the story to deal with. And at the end, after Skullface's plans have been foiled in the destruction of his underground base, Costigan says to Gordon, "Every Negro in London must have been there," you know. And Gordon says, "I dare say. Most of them are voodoo worshippers at heart." You know, there's that kind of thing. And so, yeah, there's that. But, like I said, interesting and worth looking at. But you know what you're getting into. So there you go. Skullface from Tales of Weird Menace, which is full of really pulpy stuff. Definitely worth checking out for sure. Like I said, if you're a Robert E. Howard fan or a pulp fan interested in stories from the period. There you go. I will catch you next time.